Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rolf Schieder, and I am the organizer of this lecture series. I am very honored, dear Marcia, that you agreed to be part of this experiment. The format is not an easy one because you have to combine a biographical narrative with your deep scientific insights, but I'm very sure you will do it with candor and with grace, so we all are looking forward to it. Marcia, me, and also Thorsten Meyreis are this semester teaching a course on Leonard Cohen's theology. And since we are three teachers, students make a little bit fun of us and say, well, this is the teacher's trinity. Now, guess who is the Spirit? It's, of course, Marcia, whose knowledge of Jewish theology and of Christian theology is so profound that whenever we don't really know what Leonard Cohen means, Marcia has an answer. By the way, last week we had so many questions that tomorrow you will get a whole list, but that's another story. But maybe it has a little bit to do with what we will hear from you tonight, because the term perichoresis has also something to do with the Trinity. And when we said Marcia in our Cohen seminar at the Shekinah is actually God's ability to inhabit the world and to be with its people, and also to be at different places with its people. And so I would say this also has a little bit to do with your biography, Marcia. You inhabit Manhattan as well as Kreuzberg, and you wrote a very nice book on Liebeserklärungen aus Kreuzberg und Manhattan. And you also inhabit different scientific disciplines, and so I think it's fascinating to look at your intellectual biography. So we are really looking forward to what you have to tell us. I won't say anything about this fascinating word perichoresis, but I think at the end we all will be deeply impressed that this word was at the beginning of your own biographical journey, the gift of ballet to theology. The floor is yours.
First of all, many, many thanks to Rolf Schieder for inviting me to participate. I have to put in the password again. Nope. Inviting me to participate in this Ringvorlesung. It's quite a challenge, and I have never before spoken about my dance life together with my theological life. So if I make a hash of it, you're the guinea pigs, you're the experiment. But most of all, I want to say again thanks to Rolf Schieder, because this is part of the series leading up to his retirement from Humboldt University Theology faculty, and he will give his final lecture a week from today in this room, yeah? So thanks, Rolf, for including me. Just give me a minute. The caps lock is on. And the first thing I have to say is I'm a technological idiot, and I have to here handle for the text and the pictures and the video 2 computers, and I'm sure I'm going to mess this up. So when there will be several Zusammenbruch here tonight, and we have wonderful assistants who will no doubt have to come help me. And I say this in advance for your patience. So to begin, when Rolf Schieder first asked me to contribute to this lecture series, How My Mind Has Changed, I agreed, only later to panic when I asked myself, how has my mind changed? Or has my mind changed? Or how much of my mind has to change for it to count as having changed? Or did I just fail this test? So I did what all academics do when they don't know what they're talking about. They take refuge in definitions, which could easily take up the entire time. For example, what does mind mean, right? We could spend a long time in Germany wondering about this. In I've changed my mind, it may mean assessment or judgment. In I'm losing my mind, it means much more than losing judgment, but losing all manner of emotional control. And I'll give him a piece of my mind is not really judgment at all, but the emotion of fed-upness. I could go on like this, but I thought if I did, Rolf Schieder would never again make me a cup of much-needed coffee, and since he has the best coffee in Berlin, I thought I'd better get into the question of how my mind has changed, which presupposes that I know what my mind was before it changed. At this age, I know how my arabesque or my à la seconde, another dance position, has changed. Here, for instance, is my à la seconde as I performed it a while ago. And it has changed. Here is my à la seconde today. I need that later. Minimize, I'm trying to get the technique right. Okay. But I may know how my à la seconde has changed, but I am less sure how my mind has changed. It strikes me that in important ways, it hasn't changed so much. In important ways, I've always understood the world as striving, streben, and relation. In my childhood and in my most recent book, Commonwealth and Covenant, there is this double idea, striving and relation, which means I read all those books, got a doctorate, suffered through graduate statistics, learned and forgot ancient Greek to come to the same place that I was when I was 7. Well, if that's what there is, then let's take a look at it. First, striving. Striving is that means that life takes on meaning in striving for an aim larger than one's own benefit or lifestyle, perhaps for what is only indistinctly imaginable, but ultimately beyond the fully achievable. We strive asymptotically, only approaching, but never fully achieving the goal. Life has meaning as it is always already making efforts towards a purpose beyond the satisfaction of one's life's own meaning. Said another way, the meaning of one's life does not lie in creating meaning for one's life, but in contributing to something else, something valued as important not solely for oneself, but for life and world. Pace Kant, one's capacity to autonomously choose the moral life cannot, or the moral life path, cannot itself be the purpose of one's moral life path. If we have the freedom that was so important to Kant and many other moderns, it is the freedom to do something besides something for oneself, or so I have understood it. But as soon as I say contribute to something other than oneself, we are at the second way that I have understood life, from relation. By this, I do not mean a reductionist mangling of John Locke, that we are individuals first who come together in relation for its various advantages. Locke didn't mean that, and neither do I. I mean that while we are each singular, unique persons, we become the unique persons that we are through relations with other persons, environment, and transcendent cause of both. Here is the neurobiologist Darcia Narvaez on this. Quote, one must have a concept of human nature, a realization of what constitutes a normal baseline, and an understanding of where humans are. This understanding of the human baseline affects, as Robert Doran has written, habitual attitudes, the mass momentum of feeling, and provides a normative source of meaning by which our specific lives come to have meaning. This baseline, Narvaez continues, is relational. Quote, whom a person becomes is a co-construction of genes, gene expression from environmental effects, and the ecological and cultural surroundings. There is no being without shared social relations. These relations begin in infancy with others who are close by, Narvaez explains. Daniel Stern concurs in his work on the infant's core self and core self with another. Yet relation expands out, as what affects every infant includes interactions with the health, nutritional, educational, environmental, and social opportunities, as well as frustrations and barriers that bear on each child, and in all the other persons with whom the child interacts. Post-quantum physics adds that the human condition is relational, the distinct person through relations, because the structure of physical existence is relational. Each subatomic particle is distinct, yet the trajectories of subatomic particles are guided by the interactions with other particles. In the entangled world of quantum physics, each particle, Kirk-Wechter McNally writes, is free to behave according to its own nature, and yet its entanglement with another particle allows it to act in concert with its entangled partner. Entanglement is an internal relation that issues in the freedom of the particulars. Physicist Carlo Rovelli concisely notes, we must accept the idea that reality is only interaction. All things are continually interacting with one another, and in doing so, each bears the traces of that with which it has interacted. Each bears the traces of that with which it has interacted. That is the nature of life. Einstein's spooky action at a distance, as he called it, is how things are. Or as Nobel laureate Ilya Prigogine concludes, communication, even consciousness, is present in all chemical reactions. Molecules know and are affected by what other molecules will do, even over significant distance. We are embedded, quote, in a cooperating world. In sum, interaction and reciprocity among distinct singular entities are the basis for matter, energy, existence itself. I have talked about striving and relation, but as a younger person, it was striving was at the forefront. Not because young people have not yet done what they want to do to set themselves up in the world, and they need to strive to do those things, but because relation was so thoroughly presupposed, so foundational to what Pierre Bourdieu would call my habitus, the network of dispositions, attitudes, habits, language, that guide people to act in certain ways and not others. Relation was always already there, the ground for everything so presupposed it could go unseen. Over time, however, I began to see more clearly the relationality that had always been essential to my life. Perhaps that is how my mind has changed. So where did I get this striving amid relation worldview? Early in life, of course, not from physics or biology, but from religion and dance. Not watching dance or reading about religion, but practicing, doing both. First, religion. Explicit and implicit in the way religion was practiced, talked about in my childhood was the central notion of covenant. Covenant was fundamental to my understanding of world, and later my understanding of perichoresis, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So I will begin with covenant. The covenantal understanding of world begins with the idea that being, existability, results from the source of all there is. There could be nothing, but there's something. The source of all something, items, thoughts, language, laws of physics, is what some people call God. After the Kabbalist Ein Sof and Schelling, this source is not so much what precedes effects as what is realized as it yields effects. It makes sense, David Bentley Hart writes, to ask what illuminates an object, but none to ask what illuminates light. As existence results from this source of everything, God himself, Aquinas describes, is properly the cause of universal being, which is innermost in all beings. In all things, God works intimately. The Franciscan nun, the Schwester, and physicist Ilia Delio, if you didn't think that nuns could be physicists, it's the 21st century, get with it. Ilia Delio writes, "The world continually participates in God and God in the world." In the words of Genesis, God breathed nishmat chayim, the spirit of existence, into the particular person Adam, and so into all particular persons. Poetically, we are B'Tselem Elohim, in the imago, in God's image. When I say the source of existability is intimately within us, I do not mean we are of God, like God identically or proportionally. We are not like God, only smaller. Indeed, we are radically different. Differences in corporeality and incorporeality, infiniteness and finiteness, etc. Rather, we are of God analogically, as an analogy expresses its referent, with different features, but with an undergirding of a kindness. This, too, is captured in the paradoxical image of an incorporeal God, radically different from humanity, breathing the spirit of life into corporeal creatures. Paradoxically, we, humanity, is in the image of an imageless God, from whom we are radically different, but with whom we have some analogous underpinning. So on one hand, particular beings are radically different from this source of all. On the other, particulars intimately partake of this source of existence in order to exist. This difference amid relation, this partaking yet intimate relation, is the way anything comes to be. The grammar of existence is distinction amid relation. Hector McNally, building on Wolfhard Pannenberg, summarizes, cosmos is, quote, a place in which entangled independence through relationship is the fundamental characteristic of being. If the grammar of existence is difference amid relation, all persons that exist are distinct from each other, yet also in relation, as we are in relation to all things in nature. There is no other way to exist. Existability as distinction amid relation makes humanity and society a matter of distinction amid relation. On one hand, even identical twins are different and distinct in character, worldview, and life choices. And Rolf Schieder has a pair, so you can verify this with him after the lecture. Yet on the other, the individual fact of existence, Martin Buber wrote, the individual is a fact of existence only insofar as he steps into a living relation with other individuals. Or in Elizabeth Moltmann-Vendel's words, life begins as life together. Our distinction amid relation to God and to other persons yields a cosmos of reciprocal impact and reciprocal responsibility among distinct persons. This is the baseline Narvaez was writing about. For this relational cosmos to work, each distinct person, dependent on the source of existence and on other persons for survival and development, each person must attend to those on whom she is dependent, as others must attend to her. The name for this reciprocal commitment is covenant. Covenant is a bond between distinct parties where each party gives for the sake and flourishing of the other. However profound the covenant does not subsume or erase the distinct person, nor is the individual sacrificable for the group or for the covenant itself. In Len Guzman's words, the covenant itself rests on the freedom of the covenantors. Covenants of reciprocal commitment among equals are easily imagined, as are covenants with asymmetric terms between unequal partners. The innovation of the Hebrew Bible is reciprocity between unequals, the divine and human, and among persons of different status. Unlike stipulative contracts, which protects interests, covenant protects relationship, including relationship between unequals, between the divine and human, and among different persons. One aspect of God's covenant with humanity is co-creatorship in the Judaic tradition and secondary causality in Aquinas. Because humanity is radically different from the source of all, God, human actions are also radically different. Yet, as we also partake of this source, we, analogically, secondarily, within human capacity, may make things of what exists in world. This is the idea of co-creatorship, and it is part of our covenantal responsibility. Humanity may act secondarily within our abilities to further God's vision in the world. Indeed, we have the moral correspondence to further God's vision, our Dmut Elohim. Terence Fretheim writes, quote, "Human beings are not only created in the image of God, this is who we are. Human beings are also created to be the image of God. This is their role in the world," close quote. In Aquinas, this is the idea of secondary causes. As we analogically partake of divine being, so we may analogically act in world. In his classic example, the source of existence, God, is responsible for the composition of water, sun, earth, the principles of seed germination, etc., while persons plant seeds and make harvests grow. The medieval Islamic philosophers Al-Ash'ari and Al-Ghazali similarly held that humanity performs what God has created. Another aspect of covenant is gift. As Marcel Mauss and Lewis Hyde, among others, have observed, in covenantal allegiance, the spirit of the donor is given to the recipient in the performative act of gift-giving. Donation of spirit makes the covenant, makes the bond. This is the description found in Genesis, in fact. God breathed his spirit, his nishmat chayim, into Adam, thus forging covenant with him. This bond begins dyadically, God Adam, God Noah, God patriarchs. Yet covenant does not remain dyadic. Persons give to God by giving to others in need, hekdesh, made holy. In this triangulation, one gives to God by giving to a third party, a person in need. These covenantal relations of giving are mutually constitutive. Covenantal commitment to others constitutes covenant with God, and covenant with God sustains us in covenantal commitment to others. Thus, covenant, reciprocal commitment among distinct persons, extends from dyad to larger associations. Reciprocal gift becomes gift exchange network, as Mauss described it, where gift from God to person generates gift from person to person and on to the next person through the giving loop, thus sustaining it. There is some argument today, a cynical argument, that gift exchange networks are not possible absent the physical proximity of pre-modern communities. But covenantal gift exchange networks were sustained across infrequent contact and vast distances, thousands of miles of the Pacific, for instance. Modern societies with airplane, Skype, WhatsApp, Instagram, etc., cannot claim impossible what was done in canoes. We find the triangulated covenant from God to person, from person to other person, in the Ten Commandments, the first three of which pertain to God and person, the rest seamlessly conduct among persons. Amos and Proverbs denounce the hypocrisy of performing rituals ostensibly for God, but while abandoning the afflicted, as if one could maintain bond with God absent bond with the needy. The medieval period gives us one of the most soaring expressions of the triangulated covenant. The great French biblical commentator Rashi reads Isaiah, quote, "I cannot be God unless you are my witness." And Rashi glosses, "I am the God who will be whenever you, humanity, bear witness to love and justice in the world. Close quote. God can be God when persons are just and righteous with each other. Who's in the covenantal gift-giving loop? All the nations. The covenantal promise in Genesis 3 times declares that all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. In Genesis, God speaks to non-Israelites and makes covenants with them. It is this principle of inclusivity that undergirds the extensive mandates to care for the needy, stranger, and enemy in biblical writings and in rabbinic texts. And here I have a very long footnote for anybody who wants a very long list of all these mandates to care for the needy. The effectiveness of the Hebrew poor laws was such that the Emperor Julian cited them to prod improvement of Roman poor relief. Quote, "It is disgraceful that when no Jew ever has to beg, all men see that our people lack aid from us." Close quote. The Israeli philosopher Yoram Hazony concludes that the Bible should be read, quote, "as a philosophical argument for the importance of Israel's covenant with God, not only for the Jews, but for all the nations of the earth. The biblical author wished to persuade his readers that there exists a law whose force is of universal nature because it derives from the way the world itself was made." Close quote. In the Second Testament, the triangulation of the covenantal commitment is seen in the famous passage in John, "For whoever does not love their brother or sister, whom they have not seen, cannot love, who they have seen, cannot love God, whom they have not seen." Close quote. Absent love of others, there is no love of God. But John also says that the love of God enables our love of others. Quote, "We love because he first loved us." Close quote. We can care for others because God cares for us, and caring for others is part of loving God. Irenaeus echoes, quote, "To love him, God, above all, and one neighbors do reveal the one and same God." Or as Augustine put it, the relic, Augustine's word, of God in each person gives her the capacity to love other persons. More recently, meaning in the 21st century, the Catholic theologian Richard Kearney, with a strong echo of the medieval Rashi, reprises, quote, "This is a Deus capax, who in turn calls out to the homo capax of history. Each moment we confront the face of the other and welcome the stranger." To sum up so far, each person is radically different from the source of existence, yet partakes of it to exist at all. Structured by this grammar of difference amid relation, persons are unique and different from each other, yet in necessary relation. This is our baseline, and so to flourish, we must see to care for these necessary relations, those that are close by and those that extend out in nexes of impact and influence. The name for this reciprocal commitment is covenant, a bond among distinct parties that becomes a network of networks of gift exchange, where each cares for the flourishing of the other. When I spoke of my understanding of the world, I spoke of relation, covenant, but also striving. There is striving in covenant as well, the undertaking by each distinct person to see to care for the other covenantally, the literal neighbor, but also, as our relational dependencies expand out, all those in the network loop. To consider environmental degradation, for example, in areas that are not your home, but other people's homes, or to consider how economic policies affect not only your bank account, but other people's ability to live. This involves striving, because covenant is not so much a state of being as a verb, an ongoing action. It is not something achieved, but what we do with our lives or choose not to do. An incorporeal God, out of time, may ever be covenant, but persons, in time and nature, distinct beings different from each other, make efforts in time, they strive to make their lives, distinction amid relation is the grammar of existence, and covenant is the striving to live out that grammar. That was the world I was educated in. These ideas were at first implicit in the practice of religion and ethics, in every candle lit and every prayer uttered, in the always ongoing charitable projects, in every coin given to a homeless person, in every support for the anti-war, anti-nuke, and civil rights movements. I think I thought back then that blacks shall not sit in the back of the bus was the 11th commandment. These ideas became explicit as I studied theology. And in those studies, a second theological idea became important to my understanding of the distinction amid relation structure of the world. This idea was the Trinitarian perichoresis, developed by the Cappadocian fathers of the early Eastern Christian Church. Perichoresis roughly means dancing around, the image of the three Trinitarian persons in a dance around where each is who he is in the relating to, in the dancing with others, the others. These relations constitute the whole of the dance, the complete Godhead, in which the three persons are. Person, John Milbank's note, is a relational term, while essence or substance is not. Yet, Milbank notes, drawing on Aquinas and with substantial echoes to covenant, this does not entirely collapse persons into relations, because person here is the point of equipoise between relation and substance. You will hear in Milbank's equipoise between relation and substance echoes of the covenantal idea of existence as distinction, substance amid relation. As the Cappadocians imagined it, the identity of each Trinitarian person, and inseparably the relations among them, makes what each person is, a person of the Godhead, as these identities and relations constitute the Godhead of which each is a part. No single Trinitarian person alone could be a person in a Trinity, as absent their relations, there is no Trinity in which to be a Trinitarian person. The Trinitarian persons are at once distinct, each with its own particular distinguishing notes, as Gregory of Nyssa wrote in keeping with the dance imagery. Yet though distinct, each is equal in constituting the triune whole through interrelation. In short, each person gives identity to the others, receives identity from the others, and these relations are the whole, the Godhead, in which each person is not just a person, but a person of the Trinity. Moreover, each gives the others the identity of a Trinitarian person without loss, but with repletion, fulfillment, as each gains identity in the Trinitarian event. In the Trinity, Hans Urs von Balthasar writes, quote, "The principles of individuality and community are at work together simultaneously. In the Godhead, therefore, individuality and community have a common origin." Wechter McNelly reprises, quote, "The deity of this God resides not in the persons as distinct from one another, but within and among the persons as they are related to one another, i.e., in the relationality that constitutes them and binds them," close quote. Nicholas Lash succinctly sums up, quote, "We have relationships. God is the relations that he has. God, we might say, is relationship without remainder." The discussion of perichoresis has to do not only with God, the immanent Trinity, but with humanity's understanding of it, the economic Trinity. Humanity is in the image of a triune God, of persons in necessary relations that constitutes both personal identity and the whole in which persons have identity. The imago is triune. As we partake of, as we are in the image of a relational community, our grammar and capacities are also relational. This has echoes to the idea of the moral correspondence, where humanity, in the image of a relational God, is structured with the capacity to act relationally. I am not suggesting that the concepts of moral correspondence, Dmut Elohim, and the economic trinity are identical, but rather that there is a family resemblance, as of course Christianity and Judaism are family. In reading Augustine, let me just check this out. Yeah. In reading Augustine on Trinity, Anthony Baker notes that each of us partakes of the triune God and analogously expresses this triune source of existence in different and unique ways, thus yielding a world of such varied different expressions. These earthly human expressions are, quote, the endless response of creation to God, thus sets in motion an infinite number of differences. Christ as Word, as all that needs to be said, but all is not yet said, close, until there are our human manifold earthly expressions of the triune communal source of existence. One might say that not all is yet said because God the Father doesn't do all the talking. We respond, echoing the idea of giving and reciprocity. The Trinity, like covenant, demonstrates that difference does not equate with violence or strife, nor are sameness and conformity the requirements of peace. It is peace and giving and reciprocity among different persons that is the human possibility. The possibility of such peace is realized in each human expression of Trinitarian non-violent difference, much as it is realized in each human expression of covenant. A Judeo-Christian family resemblance. 800 years after Augustine, Richard of St. Victor saw humanity's relationality as a consequence of the triune social nature of God, opening to community and to networks of relations. A century after that, Thomas Aquinas similarly held that God self-reveals the unity and distinction of Trinity, both understandable to humanity. God's act of creation, on Aquinas' account, involves both coming into being and the individuation of beings that are yet in relation. As humanity is in God's relational image, networks of relations are too humanity's nature. The person within relation of Trinitarian Penochoresis has prodded much thinking about its consequences for humanity. A few examples from the last century. The early 20th century Russian philosopher, priest, and mathematician Pavel Florensky describes the person, or self, emerging as it, quote, incorporates its I in the I of another, in the thou, much as his contemporary, the German Jewish philosopher Hermann Cohen, also said. You may know the I-thou concept from Martin Buber, but he was cribbing from Cohen. One begins most fully replete in incorporating in corpus, oneself in another, and another in oneself. Wolfhard Pannenberg, a student of Karl Barth, noted that the very concept of Trinity connotes a social God. He met not only the social relations within the Trinity, of which humanity partakes, but also between God and humanity. After all, Pannenberg observed, 2 of the 3 Trinitarian persons, Son and Spirit, are in the world in engagement with us. Jürgen Moltmann had the idea that the human community as a whole is the entity that is in God's triune image. That is, not only does perichoretic relationality render humanity relational, but what's in God's image is not each person individually, but humanity taken together. As God is the unity of multiplicities, Moltmann wrote, so humanity is in his image is the unity of multiple persons. Quote, it is not the human being as a solitary determining subject who is God's image on earth. It is the true human community, close quote. That's Moltmann. More recently, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove writes, quote, "The God who is three persons in community creates humanity in the image of community." I'm especially appreciative of the work of Daniel Bell Jr. and Aaron Riches, who have elaborated on the perichoretic idea that in giving one becomes not drained, but fulfilled. It is again, not incidentally, also a covenantal idea, contra the competitive individualism that reigns in present habitus and economics, the idea that the goal is to get as much for oneself, one's firm, one's party, and that each item or resource given to another must be a loss for oneself. We are in the image of a fulfillment in giving God. We are fulfilled in giving. Thus, we more fully express God as we live out our perichoretic giving. This unlocks the paradox of theosis, Riches writes. Becoming deiform involves receiving all one is from another in the dialogue of love, close quote. In sum, because God is the Trinitarian persons, being replete as they give to each other, partaking analogously of this God, being in the image of this God, is to become more of oneself in the act of giving. Perichoresis, Bell writes, is a means to overcome the modern illusion of the isolated, alienated self, or the postmodern dissolute self, and to give up the masculine fantasy of absolute self-possession. In the dance of charity that is the Trinity, giving does not deprive the self, but enhances it. As with covenant, there is also striving in the economic trinity in being people partaking of in the image of a perichoretic God. It is again the undertaking by each distinct person to give to others so that they flourish as who they are, and to understand that one becomes what one is from others giving to you. It is to grasp that we are not singular persons intact, sealed into the membrane of control, but singular persons who are also porous, in reciprocal relation to others and environment. Each person is not something already fully achieved, a finished product, but a process that emerges from whatever we do with our lives or choose not to do. Living in the image of a perichoretic triune God is a process, an ongoing endeavor. The giving and receiving of identity and support is a lifelong striving. We may recall Narvaez's, "There is no being without shared social relations." I could talk about other theological precepts that were important in my growing understanding of relationality and our striving to live it out. Eucharist, for example, being in the body of God with other bodies. But I'd like to turn to my other practice that taught relationality, not perichoresis, but choros, dance. I cannot remember not making dances in my head, with music, without music, to the singing inside my head. This would have been okay with my parents, but it seems I made them not only in my head, but also in the central hallway of our small New York apartment, directing my imaginary dancers and making it difficult for any real people to get from one room to the other, as they had to cross my stage. I was a bit of pain in the neck, but from this perpetual dancing, I learned, without words, that the structure of being in relation, that the structure of being is distinction amid relation. I don't mean that dance is structured from the relations among the dancers, although that is also true. I mean that dance is structured from the relations among the distinct lines, shapes, movements, speeds, rhythms, and dynamics of the dance itself. In order for anything to be, including the nonverbal properties of dance, line, shape, speed, there must be distinction, distinct lines, shapes, etc., amid relation. There must be the specific character of each movement, its specific line, shape, speed, tempo, in relation with all the other movements and their specific lines, shape, tempi, etc. This specificity amid relation is what makes the ballet. Without both the distinct lines, tempi, etc., and their relation, each gesticulation, each movement is but a random jab in the air. It's not a movement in a dance, because as an isolated gesture, it is not in a process of comprising a dance for each movement to be part of. Each motion is just a toes poke in the air, not an arabesque. In a dance, however, each lift and pivot in relation to all the others transforms each one of them from a random gesture into a gesture of the dance, because movement in relation makes a dance for all the gestures to be part of. Each movement gives the others the identity of being not a poke, but a dance movement. Each gives identity and reciprocally gains identity, becoming a movement of this dance. Each is not depleted by this reciprocal giving, but it is given identity and enriched. Of course, this is just how the Cappadocian Fathers imagined ballet. I thought the theologians were going to laugh. Nobody laughed. Okay. In sum, each Trinitarian person, just as each line, shape, tempo, and the relations among them make each what it is, a person of the Godhead or a movement in this dance. And this singularity of persons or singularity of movements in relation constitutes the Godhead or the dance, of which each is a part. No single person or movement alone could be a person in a trinity or a movement in a dance, as absent their relations, there is no trinity or ballet of which to be a part. Each gives the others the identity of being a Trinitarian person or of being a movement in this dance, and thus the Godhead or the dance exists. Each gives without loss but with repletion, as each person or movement gains identity in the Trinitarian or choreographic event. Okay, enough of trying to say this essentially non-verbal thing in words, so now we're going to try visuals, which mean we have our first technical Zusammenbruch. Let me see, we have to hit escape. Wait a minute. We have to go to the sun. No. I'm wrong. Oh no. Yes. We're okay. Yes, we're okay. Okay, what's that? A foot? Okay, not very meaningful, right? By itself? Okay, what's this? Hard to say by itself. Yeah? Okay, what's this? Another foot. Not very meaningful by itself. Hard to say. A hand. Maybe that hard to figure out thing is connected to the other hard to figure out thing. Another hand. Oh, now we're getting interesting. We have a hand going in one direction, a hand going in another direction, a foot going in one direction, a foot going in another direction. We're getting to see some interaction. Maybe this is going to mean something after all. An ear. Okay? Yes? Yes. That means that the booze and the food got here. Everybody should be relieved. Okay. In the individual pieces, absent much relation, there is not a lot of meaning here. Let's try some more relation. Now the ear is connected to a neck and a bodice, and now the hand is connected to an arm, and it also has linearity. It's not only a hand and an arm, it has directionality and shape. Another hand and arm with opposing linearity and shape. Are these in opposition? Is there tension? What's going on here? Narrative meaning starts to emerge. Foot becomes connected to leg and that drapey stuff that we couldn't figure out before, because now they are in relation. What's the relationship between the arms and the legs? We don't know yet. Let's see what happens. Parallelism. The arm is parallel to the leg. pulling in the same direction and producing the harmony that parallelism produces. But its intention with that other arm on the upper right, are we in harmony, in tension? Harmony being pulled away from tension? And here we have an arm connected to that ear and bodice. And something in the right-hand corner of that picture, a light, some reaching. Now we have linearity and directionality, and the directionality of the face and the hand and the bodice towards the light in the upper, my left, your right-hand corner, in tension with the parallelisms which seem to be pulling in the other direction. We're starting to have meaning here. Some pull towards the light in the corner and opposing pull by the parallel arm and leg. What's the story? What's the meaning? Here we have meaning. On the right, you have the reaching built from nothing other than the linearity of that is created by the body, reaching towards the stained glass window in the side of the wall, while simultaneously being pulled away from this by the parallel arm and leg, reaching, pointing in the other direction. The tension and the torque away from the light, moving towards something else, is established only by the lines and the shapes and their relations among each other. Okay. You remember the photo, yeah? This, of course, is not a complete dance. It's a moment in a dance. But it's a moment where the meaning of this moment becomes clear because of the relationality of the lines and the shapes and the light. What's that? Maybe a hand? Maybe another hand, right? Two hands. Much more meaning. Crossing in friendship, in a handshake, in aggression, not clear yet. Two more hands. The same hands? Not clear. Reaching, established again by the linearity of the hands. Two more hands, not the same hands as the lower corner. Reaching, however, in the same direction. Four hands, more meaning. More meaning. Here we have, I want to go back, yes. These figures, we have the bodies are parallel and the arm movement is parallel. There seems to be some cooperation going on, some synchronicity, some agreement. The bodies are parallel, the hips are parallel, the arms are parallel. More agreement, disagreement. Established again by the lines created by the bodies. One reaching up, one reaching across. Tension, cooperation, devolving into tension. What's going on here in this dance? A hand. Another hand. Aggression. one hand grabbing the other. Looks like our cooperation has sort of gone down the drain at this point. She's falling into him, he's catching her. Maybe there's a possibility for cooperation. Hand, head. What does that mean? Hand catching head. Again, perhaps there's a possibility for reconciliation. One arm, another arm, but here we have parallelism. Agreement, disagreement, created by the angularity of the lines. Her arms up, him grabbing, the angularity of the line cutting across her lines. Lots of angularity. Something here is not going well. Maybe they'll get together in the end after all. Okay, now you've been very patient. Let's see. I'm going to take a break. How do we get out of here? We have to hit. Wait, maybe it is. It is at the beginning. Yes. So now you can see what relationality looks like, really. I'm just going to close with noting, and then there's going to be another video of about 5 minutes. I'm just going to close in noting that so far I've been discussing about dance, focusing on relation. But as with covenant and trinity and perichoresis, there is striving in this daily project of dance. There is no fully finished, achieved person. There is no fully finished, achieved covenant. These are verbs. And covenant exists of doing the living them out. And in the same way, there is no perfectly achieved arabesque, pirouette, or choreography. Dance is the asymptotic striving to becoming that is never fully achieved. Every day in dance class and in rehearsal is the ongoing effort to move into a better à la seconde, a more acute listening to the music, a richer relation to it, a more compelling sensitivity to the choreography and to the other dancers. This, like covenant, is a never-ending process, like perichoresis, of attending to what one part of your body is doing in relation to other parts, and what you are doing in relation to many things besides, to the ideals of the dance movement, the perfect arabesque that one never reaches, what you are doing to reach the most expressive timing, rhythm, tonality of movement, the most engaged relations with the other dancers, the most meaningful contribution to the dance as a whole. Dancing and making dances is a practice that becomes by striving to live it out in the receiving from the movement itself, from the music, from the choreography, from the other dancers, as one also gives to them. Each movement and dancer in a dance becomes what they are through this reciprocal engagement of giving and receiving. Indeed, the dance as a whole comes into being through this reciprocal commitment, as in covenant and as in Trinity. One might say that dance is persons striving amid relation without remainder. And I would like to talk about the next short solo that I will show. It's a piece called Religiously Eventually, which I choreographed and conceptualized the music for. The performer, Lila Rosen, is both dancing and singing in this piece. The original chant from which the music is based is from the Jewish High Holiday Service. The piece was just performed a few weeks ago in New York. I want to end with it because it combines all that we've been talking about, the religious and the balletic forms of my mind.
Do not talk to me right now. Do not talk, please. I need to focus.
Yeah.
Go.
Thank you. Thank you.